Good morning, church. Good to see you this morning. We are glad that you're here, part of our worship service with us this morning. As Jay said, we've got some save the dates, so you can send those out. We'll have them in the back. Had some a couple weeks ago. We've got some more, and we can always make more. We want to have a big crowd that day. You know, that's all dependent upon a couple of things, isn't it? That you have family and that you have friends. And I hope you have both. And if you don't have one over the other, pick one. You know, it's just the way it is. But I want to ask you a question this morning as we get started. A question that will lead us into our lesson, and you'll see the reason for our lesson this morning. But I want to ask you about these people. I want to ask you, what do you know about Epaphroditus? What do you know? What do you remember? Do you remember that Paul talks about him as being in Philippians chapter 2, being a fellow servant, being a leader, being a worker? What do you remember about Onesiphorus? Onesiphorus was a man in 2 Timothy chapter 1, Paul talked about that he oft refreshed me. What do you know about Epaphras? Epaphras is mentioned in Colossians chapter 4 and verse 12 as a fellow leader and as an individual that constantly prayed for and a leader in prayer with regards to the church at Colossae. Mary, depending upon, of course, which Mary you mentioned, but Mary that came in John chapter 12 and anointed the feet of Jesus. Well, what about Priscilla and Aquila? Well, Acts chapter 18. Priscilla, easy for me to say, Priscilla and Aquila, and the work that they did with regards to the early church. What about Jesus? Well, you know, we preach sermons upon sermons upon sermons about Jesus. When we think about them and Elisha and the great servant of the Old Testament that he was. Now, here's my question. What do all of these have in common? Well, let's look at them. You might say, well, they're all men now. You got Mary and you got Priscilla and Aquila. You've got ladies there or a lady. And so, no, it's not all men. You might say, well, they're all in the New Testament. Well, Elisha's not in the New Testament. You might say, well, you know, they're all workers with Paul. Well, Mary and Jesus and Elisha, not workers with Paul. Well, okay, preacher. What is it that they all have in common? If you go back and look at each text with regards to these individuals and countless others that we could have chosen out of the Bible, but when you go back and look at these texts and for these individuals, these folks were said to have done something good and were said to have been a blessing to those that were around them. You know, you've had people probably in your life. They've come and gone, and you were glad to see them go. Just literally, you were glad to see them go. They just didn't bring any sunshine into your life. They didn't bring a blessing. They weren't an individual that really helped motivate you. They weren't an individual that helped inspire you. They weren't an individual that helped get you going. You've seen those people. You've had those people. Well, these folks, somehow, somewhere within their ministry, within their life, they were all said to be blessings to others that they were around. But then I didn't put up Boaz, and of course out of the Old Testament. And then we ask ourselves, well, how can we be blessings? How can we be a blessing to others? This morning, that's what I want us to look at. I want us to sit and I want us to think about and concentrate upon how can we really be a blessing to those that we come in contact with. If sin, as we have defined it on occasion before, is what contradicts sonship with God and brotherhood with mankind, we understand that it's not just about, if you will, that vertical relationship that we have with God. But it's also about, as God addresses it, it's also about that relationship that we have with one another. That beautiful relationship that we have with one another. And during the pandemic, when we were all shut up in our homes and we couldn't even get out and come to worship, I don't know about you, but really the one thing that I missed was the fellowship. getting to see you, being encouraged by you, understanding that as I struggle, you struggle, and as you struggle, I struggle. And to see your face and to be motivated by your service to God. Well, I think the first answer is we learn to love each other. We learn to love, and love, as the Bible has said, one of the sad things in our society today is that we have become very segmented people. And we have become folks that if you will, we've become divided. Because in my opinion, now I may be wrong, but in my opinion, because we have lost the idea, the true teaching with regards to love. When we think of love, we have to understand that this is what really God expects. You know, Paul would write to the church at Thessalonica, and he would write in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and he would tell them in verse 9, now concerning brotherly love, you don't need that I write unto you. That's an interesting thought. Now, the verse does not end there, the sentence does not end there, but just think about it for a minute. Paul says, concerning brotherly love, I don't need to write to you. I don't need to tell you about it. You all should know about it, that you're to love one another. And so then Paul would say in Romans chapter 13, verses 8 and 9, oh man, nothing but to love one another. That's an expectation. But then we have to ask ourselves as we think about that, well, what is love? Well, love really is more than just an emotion, more than just a feeling. Love is the idea of really wanting what is best for somebody else. And so when God says you need to love your brother, you need to love one another, the admonition is you need to want what is best for them. You need to help them, excuse me, to the point of showing them, helping them through life. Because you see, God showed us how to do that. Not only, if you will, not only did God say, I expect you to do that, but let me show you how to do it. Well, God, how do you do that? Here in His love, not that we loved God, but that He loved us. John said in 1 John chapter 4. In other words, we're so often tied to the idea, well, I like them because they like me. They don't like me, so I don't like them. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Why? Because they don't want to have anything to do with me. We get tied up in that, if you will, that almost that childish idea of relationships. You remember when you were a child out on the playground and you'd slip a little note to a little girl, a little boy, do you like me? I like you. Do you like me? And then if they'd say no, then you know, I don't like them. Well, we get caught up in that idea as adults. But the expectation is to love one another. And God says, look, I loved you. And Paul carried as far as in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 following, God showed or God demonstrated His love towards us in that while we were yet sinners. People that were acting in such a way that said, I don't love God. I don't want to have anything to do with God. And yet, Paul says, God demonstrated His love towards us. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He sent His very best for us. He says, here, I want what is best for you, so I'm sending my best to get you through, to get you to the point where your sins are forgiven. And so God really, if you will, He epitomized, He showed us love, but then He explained love. In 1 Corinthians 13th chapter, personally, I think you have to go back to the 12th chapter. In the 12th chapter of 1 Corinthians, you have these spiritual gifts, you know, the gifts of speaking in tongues and prophecy and the ability to interpret these things, to interpret dreams and so forth and so on. And as you look at this, Paul talks about these spiritual gifts and how you're to use these gifts for the furtherance of the church, for the edifying of others, for the building up of the body. But then he says in the 12th chapter, the verse 31, he says, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. And then he says in the 13th chapter, though I have the tongues, the ability to speak in tongues, He says, though I give my body to be burned, though it goes through several ideas. And he says, but if I don't have love, it doesn't profit me anything. I can be the greatest servant. I can be the individual that does the greatest good. But if I don't have love, if I'm doing it for some other reason, what good is it? And then beginning, especially in verse 4, he talks about love, doesn't he? Love that suffers long, is kind, does not parade itself, does not envy, does not boast. Bears all things. We're jumping now the characteristics. It gets to the end. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never fails. It's always there. Whether it be tongues, they're going to fail. Prophecies will end. But not love. Love is that great, if you will, that great characteristic that we should all have for one another. And so God says, look, I want you to love. I've shown you what love is. I've explained to you love. But then he says, let you exemplify love. You show it off. Why? Why is that so important? Well, it's that little passage in John the 13th chapter where Jesus says, by this shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another. By this, everybody's going to know that you're a follower of mine. By this, all men will say, there's a Christian. There's a follower of Jesus. How? Simple. By having love for one another. So love becomes that badge, if you will. You don't have to walk around. You don't have to walk around. Do you like walking around with name tags on? I don't. I was at Freed-Hardeman Lectures here a few weeks ago, and we walk around with name tags on, and it's fine because I do walk upon some people that, they've changed. I haven't. They've lost hair. They've gained weight. They've gotten ugly. I haven't. So I realize the value of it, but it's just not something that I'm a fan of. Wearing a name tag, hello, my name is. You just want to put something stupid like Stump or something like that. We as Christians don't have to walk around name tags. The world knows us. The world knows us by our love, and so we show forth that love for one another. We are to be individuals that, as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and verse 1, pursue love. Now, I want you to think about that for just a second. Go back to what we just said. 1 Corinthians 12, what? Spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians 13, Paul was told in chapter 12, I'm going to show you a more excellent way. That way was love. And then he begins, as we have it, the 14th chapter, and he says this, pursue love. He says, I want you to show it off. I want you to follow it. I want you to do what you're supposed to do. I want you to love individuals. I want you to love individuals, first of all, that hurt you. And there were those and are those, I'm sure, that have hurt you. They've hurt your feelings. They've hurt your pride. They've hurt your dignity. They've even hurt your reputation or maybe your family. God says, I want you to love them. God says, I want you to love not just the folks that hurt you, but I want you to love the people that you hurt. Oh, maybe you said something that you shouldn't have said. It slipped out, maybe with thinking or maybe without thinking. Maybe it came out in malice and shouldn't have. But you've hurt those individuals, and you know that you've hurt those individuals. What does God say? God says, be kind one to another. Tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. I want you to love them. I want you to love even though you're hurting. An old dog might have been around the family for many years. But that old dog gets hurt or gets sick, and you might go to help take care of that old dog. And because he's hurting so bad or she's hurting so bad, she may turn and bite you before she really thinks. Sometimes we're like that to people. It's not what they've done. It's not what we've done. It's what's going on with us and in us. We hurt. And so we just let it out. Those people that we've let it out on, those people that we've exploded on, we still need to love them. And so we show off our love by being the individuals that we're supposed to be, by doing the things that we're supposed to do, by supporting each other, by serving each other, supporting them in difficult times, supporting them as they go through heartaches and hurts, as they go through life's disappointments, as they go through life, as they're traveling through life, we're supporting them. That's what even part of worship is, isn't it? We studied here a couple of weeks ago the subject of worship. And as we looked at it in Hebrews chapter 10, remember, the Hebrew writer says that we're to consider one another, provoke to love, good works, that we're to be individuals that are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is. And we've used that verse to talk about don't forget, forsake, don't desert the assembly. And yes, in part, that's what it's about, but the greater context there is you don't forsake the assembly because that's where you get your encouragement from. But exhort one another. Remember that last part of that verse? So much the more as you see the day approaching. And so as we love each other, we're individuals that are supporting each other, but we're also sharing. What can I do to help you? How can I be of assistance to you? Galatians 6, verse 2, bear one another's burdens. My love for you says I want to share with you. I want to share what I have with you. I want to share my life with you. I want to share my knowledge with you. I want you to share yours with me. That's love. So a love that shares, a love that supports, a love that serves. A love that's willing to serve one another. A love that's willing to say, okay, this is going to cost me some time. This is going to cost me some energy. This is going to cost me some effort. This is going to cost me something. But I'm willing to pay the price because I love you. And so love then is that which shares, that which cares, that which helps. And so Malachi asks the question in Malachi chapter 2 and verse 10. Have we not all one Father? Has not one God created us? Why deal we treacherously every man with his neighbor? See, Malachi asked this question. He says, look, we all have the same God. We all have the same Father. And he says, why do we deal with each other in such a way that is unbecoming of a child of God, unbecoming of a Christian, unbecoming of a person? If we're going to be a blessing to folks, and that's what it's all about, then we have to be individuals that love others and love them with a pure heart fervently. It's World War I. A German soldier jumps into a foxhole to avoid enemy fire. When he does, he jumps into a hole with what is called an Englishman. He jumps back. He's ready to bayonet the Englishman when he realizes that he's already been hit with fire and he's not doing well. And so his hated enemy, the Englishman, points to his chest, and the soldier reaches into the pocket of his enemy. And he reaches into the pocket of his enemy and he pulls out what's in the pocket, and it's 3 pictures. And he can tell the man's not going to make it. And so this German soldier holds up these 3 pictures. He realizes that his enemy just wants to see those pictures one more time before he dies. And so he holds up those pictures for him to see. The man looks at them one last time, and then he closes his eyes. And he drifts off into eternity. I wonder how many times in life we come across folks that are not necessarily our enemies. They're our neighbors. They're our associates. They're our co-workers. They're our friends. And by the way, we list everybody as friends. Yeah, I know them. I met them 10 years ago. They're my friend. You hadn't seen them in 10 years and you just met them one time, but we still classify them as friends. But anyway, learn to love them. If you want to be a blessing, learn to love people for who they are and where they are. But then secondly, if we're going to be a blessing to others, we've got to respect folks. Now, this is hard. This is something that is completely different in our culture today than what it was in my day and age. I was thinking about this week. My mother and father were old-fashioned when old-fashioned was new-fashioned. So they were really back in times. Everybody that I spoke to, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. You walked into a building, you took your hat off. You respected the folks of age. If they wanted to detain you for a minute and pinch your cheek, you let them pinch your cheek. You smiled at them. You talked to them. And if you went past what would be considered a senior citizen, now remember when I was that age, a senior citizen was anybody 20 or above. You went past them, you spoke to them, you smiled at them, and you said hello. Those were considered, if you will, manners or means of respect of people and of places and of events. We're not like that anymore. We've kind of lost that. You got dressed up to go to church on Sunday. Everybody, the men wore coats and ties, and the ladies wore their nice long dresses, and everybody, fixed their hair. And I still do fix both of my hairs, and we were like that. We've become a more casual society. That's fine. Business dress is not business dress anymore. Business dress is khakis and a polo, and that's fine. That's fine. There's nothing. I'm not condemning anything along that line. But what we have lost in all of that is a respect for one another. We've become commonplace with one another, and so thus we don't respect one another. But now we have to ask ourselves the question, what really is respect? Is respect about saying yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir? Is that really respect? Well, yeah, but not really. The word respect has the idea of valuing. That's really what the word means. It means to value, to hold in esteem. And so when we talk about respecting maybe the Lord's church or respecting the Lord or to respect our neighbors, we're talking about holding value or holding esteem, to consider them worthy. The Bible talks about respecting really all people. In Titus chapter 2, there's an interesting, you might consider it one paragraph or you might consider it three, depending upon how you look at it. But Paul there talks to the preacher Titus, and he talks about the older men and the older women and the younger women and the younger men. And he talks about each one of them having a role. It didn't say that the old folks were to be dismissed, men or women. It didn't say that the young folks, men or women, or boys or girls, were to be dismissed. They all had value, they all had worth, and they all had a ministry, if you will, in the Lord's kingdom. They're all of value. Respect each person. Respect them for who they are. Respect them for what they are. We may not always agree. We may not always see eye to eye. Paul addressed this in Romans 14. In Romans 14, Paul is talking about matters of opinion there, and he's basically saying, he's talking about meat and meat offered idols, and certain folks saying that certain things shouldn't take place because it was wrong when the scriptures didn't address that issue. And Paul basically said this. He said, respect others' opinion. Now, we can't always just follow everybody's opinion. Why? Because there's a whole bunch of different opinions out there. But he says, it's all right. Now, admittedly, Paul was addressing matters of opinion. He was not addressing matters of doctrine. He was addressing the things with regards to, it'd be all right to accomplish this way, to do it that way, such as We talked not long ago about the Lord's Supper and about how to handle it. The idea of how to handle, say, singing in the worship service. And we look at those things, and we could go several different directions, but we have to stick with what's taught in the Bible. We stick with that first of all, but then how to maybe answer that, there's certain leeway. So we have to learn to respect. And so thus we treat them with respect. Peter would say in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 17, honor the brotherhood. Respect the brotherhood. Honor all men. He doesn't say just honor a few men, just honor some. He says honor people. Learn to love people. Learn to show respect to people. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love and honor, preferring one another. He would write to the church at Rome in Romans chapter 12 and verse 10. He says, you see, true love does what? It respects people. And so if I want to be a blessing, I need to learn to respect people, to value people. I don't need to say, okay, you don't agree with me, I'm going to write you off. Or you're not like me, I'm going to write you off. You don't have the same education level that I have, I'm going to write you off. You don't have the same vocabulary that I have, I'm going to write you off. You don't have the same background that I have, I'm going to write you off. You don't have the same beliefs with regards to politics, I'm going to write you off. You don't live in the same neighborhood I do, I'm going to write you off. That's not treating people with respect. That's not holding them in high esteem. You see, as we respect folks and as we express that respect, we simply we learn to humble ourselves and appreciate everyone. I'll carry you to a very, very well-known passage and make the application. John 3, verse 16. For God so loved the world. It didn't say he loved a country. It didn't say he loved a neighborhood. It didn't say he loved a socioeconomic group. It didn't say that he was in love with just, if you will, just a certain sect of people or a certain education level or a certain profession. It said God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. God loved us all. Our respect of others is when we simply humble ourselves and are willing, if you will, to hold folks in high esteem and treat them mannerly no matter who they are. And so we become a blessing by loving others, by respecting others, but also by finding a way to help people. It's easier said than done, isn't it? But God expects that of us. We just mentioned Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32, be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. There's God's expectations to help one another. To be individuals that help bear one another's burdens as we bear our own burdens. To look for opportunities to be of assistance. To be individuals that go out of the way to help others. It's explained by one story. In Luke chapter 10, there's a certain lawyer that comes to Jesus. And he wants to know what he must do to inherit eternal life. Great question. That's a question really which everybody should ask. And so Jesus says, well, it's simple. He says, what does the law say? And so this old lawyer, he begins by saying, well, love the Lord God, honor your father and mother. And Jesus says, yeah. He carries through the law, and Jesus says, yeah, that's what the law says. But he's wanting to know something. He says, is that it? Jesus then teaches a lesson. That lesson is important. It's a lesson about an individual that went down from Jerusalem, went down a very common way, very common road, and he fell among thieves. Here are folks that were self-gratifying in what they did. They evidently beat him to a pulp. They were going to take what was his and make it theirs. And so the Bible says, as Jesus tells the story, that then it was what we would say good luck. It just a really good thing happened. A priest, a man of God, a man that was considered under the old law to be not the holiest of holies, but to be a holy individual, to be a servant of God, to do what he's supposed to do. And he should have helped, and he looked at the man. And the idea there in the Greek is he looked at him. He looked intently at him. And then he backed away. I don't want anything to do with that. Now, why he did that, we don't know. Could it have been that according to the old law, this would have made him a man that if he'd have touched some blood of this man, that he would have been considered unclean and he couldn't have gone in to worship Jerusalem? It's very well possible that that was his thinking. The scriptures don't tell us what his thinking was. It just says that he looked, he saw, and he went. So you had a priest, and then you had a Levite. These were the religious family of the Old Testament, right? These were the folks that the priesthood came through, but these were the religious folks. And he kind of looks. His look is, the word is different there. It's more of he just kind of looks and, no, I don't want anything to do with this. That's not for me. And he goes around from the other side. The Samaritan. We recently talked about the Samaritans. The Samaritans, when Babylon came and took a part of the children of Israel away and took them into captivity, they left the sick, the weak, the old, and also the females, or not all of them, but some of the females. And then what happened is folks on the other side of the river came in and intermarried, and you had what was considered a mixed breed of people. They were the Samaritans. These were folks that didn't like the Jews, and Jews didn't like them. They didn't get along. They didn't see eye to eye. They didn't really respect one another. And they didn't love one another for sure. And yet that Samaritan, the most unlikely of persons to stopped and helped that man. Having compassion. There's your word. Having compassion upon him. And as he stops to help him, he carries him in, he carries him to an inn. Now, mind you, they didn't have Holiday Inns in that day and age, and so an inn was probably somebody's house. He carries him into an inn. He nurses his wounds all night long, and as he leaves, because he's got to go, he leaves 2 denarii, which is 2 days' wages. 2 days' wages. And he tells the man, you take care of this man, and when I come back through, if I owe you more, I'll pay it. And Jesus asked the question, he said, then who's his neighbor? This is the story where the rubber meets the road. This is where we leave the church building and act like the church. This is where we go from the 4 walls of the building and we act like Christ. And we walk as he walks, and we simply ask one question: what can I do to help you? How can I be of assistance to you? What can I do to help you? We then that are strong ought to bear the scruples, the infirmities, the problems of the weak, and not to please ourselves. That's what Paul wrote in Romans 15, beginning in verse 1. You see, we are to exemplify that fact, and so we ask that question: what do I need to do to help you? How can I be a blessing to you? You see, John would write that whosoever has world's goods and sees his brother have need and shuts up his bowels of compassion from him, he says, you don't have the love of God. 1 John chapter 3, verse 17. We need to ask that question. How can I help you? Now, as we ask that, we may ask it of the person themselves, or we may just simply ask it from a standpoint of within our mind. How can I help them? Can I send them a card? Can I bake them a cake? Can I give them a gift card? Can I give them a call? Can I be there for them? Can I stay away from them? That was kind of what my dad did back years ago when we were kids growing up. When my sister and I was growing up, my sister always helped Mom in the kitchen. And at night, supper would be on the table right when Dad would walk in almost. And sometimes it wasn't right then. Sometimes it was a couple of minutes, and Dad would go in and wash up, and he'd come and he'd sit at the table, and he would ask Mother, he would say, what can Paul do to help you? Thanks, Dad. Whether he knew what the answer was going to be, stay out of my way. But you see, we need to ask that of ourselves. What can we do? It may be as simple as a smile. It may be as simple as just a pat on the back. It may be as simple as just a little note. It may be more demanding. They may ask you to carry them to the doctor. And in this day and age with price of gas, I read someone the other day, they said it was going to cost me $140 to fill up my tank with gas. And if I didn't pay for my tank of gas, it was only going to cost me $85 to get out of jail. And he said, I figure I saved about $40. So, it may cost you. But still, the Good Samaritan stopped. And that's who was blessed in his deeds. How are we going to be a blessing? Learn to help others. Learn to love them. Learn to respect them. Learn to treat them with kindness as we show all of that to one another. To understand we are folks that are in a world, while we're not to live like the world, we are to be folks that help the world see Jesus Christ. And so we let our light shine before men, that they may see our good works and glorify our Father, which is in heaven. This morning, if you're not a New Testament child of God, or you're an individual that needs to rededicate your life, won't you come? All together we stand and sing.